I call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 78 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Pursuant to the order of reference of Friday, November 25th, 2022, the committee continues consideration of Bill C-20, an act establishing the Public Complaints and Review Commission and amending certain acts and statutory instruments. Today, the committee resumes clause-by-clause consideration. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. I will start with we have a budget for this study, and we need to amend the budget. I believe everyone has got a copy of the budget. Can we quickly get approval to go ahead with this budget? You move it? All in favor? Carried. Good. This means hot food. That's all. Okay. I'm sorry?
Translation to?
We can go until 7:30, I understand.
2 full hours.
2 full hours.
We can't all go back.
2 full hours. That's
We get 2 hours, and we can go till 2:07. Anyway, let us carry on. So I will now once again welcome the officials who are with us. They are available for questions regarding the bill, but will not deliver any opening statements. So with Canada Border Services Agency, we have Kathy Malte, Director, Recourse Directorate. We have from the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Joanne Gibb, Senior Director, Strategic Operations and Policy Directorate. And we have Leslie McCoy, General Counsel. With the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, we have Randall Coops, Director General, International Border Policy, Martin Lukes, Manager, Border Policy Division, Deidre Pollard-Bussey, Director, Policing Policy, and with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Kathleen Clarkin, Director, National Recruiting Program, Alfredo Bangloy, Assistant Commissioner and Professional Responsibility Officer. So thank you all for joining us today. So where we left off, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we go to where we left off, we realized in regards to NDP 6, that at our last meeting, we amended NDP 6 to remove their newly proposed provision, which would have concluded or required the conclusion of all investigations to take place within a year. So, but we did not when we removed that, we did not restore some language, the original language which would have been proposed in the original act. So I'm going to, and I can explain further, but I'm going to ask for unanimous consent to go back to NDP 6, and then I would like to make an amendment, but I know I can't speak to that yet.
Thank you. Do we have unanimous consent? Agreed?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
And I have copies of all the language, and both official language and tons of copies. Thank you. So as I was saying, just to clarify, so we removed the language of NDP 6 to, this is in dealing with investigations within the 1 year. However, again, the change, we did not then go back and restore the language or return the language after the amendment, which was found, or the original found in the legislation, and there would be no legal obligation for the PCRC, RCMP, and CVSA to establish those service standards on complaint-related time. So the proposed new language to restore back into the motion is in green when you all get your copies. And it would read as under, I'll just skip the part in terms of 28.1 or Section 29 are to be conducted, and this is the new part, the time limits within which each of them is to deal with complaints made under this act and. I'll maybe let everyone catch up, but. And then in the second section.
Do we need to read all of these in the record, or just, can we just? Sorry, do we need to read all these in the record?
Okay, I just want to make sure, and that in part 2, that under 28.2, the new would be added to the are to be conducted, this is new, and the time limits within which each of them is to deal with the complaints made under this act. So it's simply to restore language that was in regards to the time limits, but when we defeated NDP 6, we did not then go back and restore this language. So it's a little bit technical.
So I'll give the legislative clerk a little
Yep.
time to absorb this, because there's no line numbers and whatnot in their own.
Maybe in the meantime, Chair, are there any officials want to discuss why this restoring of this language is actually needed?
Anyone wants to comment? Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, so as it stood at the end of last meeting, the bill would have read that there were service standards required only for specified activities reviews, which is one of the roles of the PCRC, but the other role is the investigation of complaints. So as it stood, the requirement to have service standards for the public complaint process was removed. So the amendment right now introduced would restore that, so that there would be a requirement for the PCRC, the RCMP, the CBSA to jointly establish service standards, both for specified activity reviews and the dealing with public complaints.
Okay.
legislative clerk's assistance, the easiest thing to do that would create the same outline of what has been shared around is to sub-amend NDP 6 to remove B and D. But the language would be as,
So, okay,
As
so you're moving a
described.
sub-amendment to remove section B and D from NDP 6?
Yes. Which would give the language then, which is what's been passed around in yellow and green.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Mr. Julian?
Good to see you, Mr. Biddle. I think probably I would be tempted to propose that we just restore NDP 6 in its integrity because it was a very, very good amendment. I understand that that ship has sailed, but the reason why I voted against the amendment that was originally offered was for that very reason, that the complications then eliminate both the issue of the service standards that I understand the committee has voted on, and they don't see, they don't necessarily agree with the NDP's approach on having service standards established, but also ensuring that we have union representatives as part of how those standards are established. So I would ask through you, Mr. Chair, to our witnesses, if they follow the bouncing ball on this so that we can understand what Ms. O'Connell is proposing now. I certainly agreed with her first approach. I'm less positive about her second approach, so I would like to see both approaches. Hopefully the witnesses have both the original Liberal amendment to restore some of the components of NDP 6. Hopefully, no, you don't have that? I think it would be appropriate for them to have copies of that so they are able to better advise us on the two approaches and what the differences would be in those approaches.
Mr. Chair, could I offer a suggestion? Just to keep the meeting moving, and I was asked to also make sure that this language gets clarified, but perhaps we could just park NDP 6, allow us all to get the materials in front of us, but just with a commitment to come back to it before we complete the study, because I don't want us to suspend for a significant amount of time for getting documents, as long as we just have a commitment so that I think we all have the right intentions. We just want to make sure the language is right and makes sense. So could we just park this with the commitment to come back to it?
I am advised that we can't park a single amendment. We have to park the whole clause. So we can park clause 8 and come back to it.
It's 6, isn't it? 7. 8.
Yeah. Are we agreed to park clause 8, Mr. Julian?
I would agree with that suggestion because as we finished our last meeting, there was issue around whether CPC 5 and CPC 6 were impacted by the amendment that passed on NDP 6, and I think the clause as a whole needs to be considered, including those two amendments, because when we come out of clause 8, then hopefully we'll have clarified all of the impacts of the various amendments.
So has the committee agreed to park clause 8? Seeing no disagreement, it's parked. Okay. So that means we go forward with what, 9? Does that mean stood? Parked.
Close 9.
Okay. Okay, so clause 8 is parked for the moment. We go to clause 9. Shall clause 9 carry? Yes? Shall clause 10 carry? Yes? Shall clause 11 carry? This brings us to Clause 12. And first up for Clause 12 is NDP 7. Mr. Julian, if you please.
Yes, and this comes as well as part of the recommendations from Breaking Barriers. Currently, the bill as read basically gives the option of the minister to provide a copy of the report or summary to the commissioner or president. If the minister considers it appropriate to do so, NDP 7 would ensure that the minister must provide a copy of the report to the commissioner and president on the same day as the minister receives the report or summary. It's a matter of transparency, and it is also, I think, a principle that needs to carry through in this bill. So I'm humbly moving that amendment.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, shall all in favor of NDP 7? Opposed? Carried. Shall Clause 12 as amended carry? On division? So we don't have, we're going to Clause 13 now, we don't have Elizabeth yet.
Oh, well, yeah, if we can invite her.
Okay, so we go now to Clause 13. First up is G1 in the name of Ms. May. Ms. May is online. Can we invite you to turn on your camera?
G1. Oh, G1's government.
Oh, G1? I'm confused.
I don't get to
I stand corrected.
see, Mr. Chair. I know green, but it's party there.
Yeah, so we'll go with G1, which is not what I thought. Oh, go ahead. Somebody.
There's something missing here.
Sure. Thank you. Just again, thank you to the legislative clerk. So I move the amendment that will be in Clause 13, Paragraph 1, and we are proposing that the chairperson must, within 6 months, not 3 months, after the end of each fiscal year, submit to the minister a report on the activities of the commission under the Act. And the rationale for this, just very quickly, is the timing, and perhaps officials can explain it if I can't do so clearly, but essentially, currently the PCRC's annual report would be due back at the same time that the annual report for the RCMP and CBSA are also due. So it would be that that extension of time would allow the ability for those reports not to go at the same time, so they could incorporate anything. And I don't know if perhaps there's anything added, but essentially it's just changing so that the timing is not at the same time, so that they can be incorporated if needed, the information be incorporated if needed. And I don't know if Ms. Gibb would want to correct anything or clarify that.
I can just add a little more detail that this clause, when you read it in line with 72.1, the RCMP and CBSA have to report to the minister on how they've implemented the PCRC's recommendations. So if our reports go at the same time, the PCRC doesn't have the benefit in its annual report to actually comment on the degree to which the agencies have implemented our recommendations. So extending it by 3 months would allow us time to actually take those reports and comment on it or look at it further and include it in our report to Parliament.
Sorry, Mr. Shipley first, then Mr. Julian.
Yeah, I agree. That did clear it up a little bit. I thought there was some confusion. That's what I was going to ask for, was the straightening out of the timeline, so that makes it more sense. Is the 6 months going to be enough time?
We might have to work overtime, but we'll get it done.
Thank you. That's clear now. Thank you.
Mr. Julian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I support the amendment, and I think it makes good sense. What I'd like to do is supplement or amend the proposed amendment to the bill by incorporating NDP 8, which specifies March 31st each year, as opposed to the end of the fiscal year, for further clarity and transparency.
So, Mr. Julian, could you expand on the, so we know exactly what we're seeing here?
Instead of reading after the end of the fiscal year, it would read 6 months after March 31st each year. It's
If ours is passed, then NDP is a conflict.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai une question.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I don't know if there's any point in stipulating March 31st. Perhaps you could help me understand. Does this really make a difference for the Commission if we do add that? It's the same thing, really. Thank you.
It was recommended in Breaking Barriers as just providing for more transparency.
So NDP 8 really just adds a line after this line, is what you're saying?
Well, I'm offering it as an amendment so that we can get hopefully both done
Okay.
in one shot.
Are we good with that?
Yeah? Ça irait dans les 6 premiers mois.
Well, it would be in the 6 months following the 31st of March of every year.
Mr. Julian, if I
Julian?
may.
The clerk would like to ask you a question on this regard.
Did you want to keep suivant la fin de chaque exercice?
Do you want to keep it up until the end of each fiscal year or March 31st? I don't know what line you're referring to. Line 18, page 8 of the French version. Well, it says here, within the first 6 months, that was the government's amendment, after the 31st of March of every year. That would replace every fiscal year.
And And in English would be the same thing. You would replace each fiscal year by, you would just add after March 31st each year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're clear about the wording. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Ms. O'Connell?
Can I just get clarity that this is going to be added to my amendment of the, or our amendment of the, within 6 months after March 31st of each year, and it's going to then replace NDP 8? Okay, perfect. We're fine with that.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on Mr. Julian's sub-amendment? Are all in favor of Mr. Julian's sub-amendment? All opposed? Carried. This goes back to the main motion, G1. Is there any further discussion on G1 as amended? No discussion. All in favor of G1 as amended? Opposed? Carried. And that means that block 0.2 cannot be moved because it is identical, or was identical. That brings us to NDP 9. Mr. Julian, go ahead.
See, associé à
Thank you, and this pertains to Clause 13. I'm proposing an amendment as follows. They were talking about the number of complaints that were filed. I'm referring to line 34 in the French version, 32 in the English version. It says, complaints, including those, if any, disposed of through the reconciliation process with Indigenous peoples. That was a recommendation in order to break down barriers. It does affect the agency. And it certainly raises questions as to how the RCMP is dealt with, and that's mainly at the provincial level. But the amendment that I am offering here is indeed to talk about the agency and the reconciliation process.
On this, Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Just very briefly, yes, we think this is a good amendment, and I will be supporting this.
Any further discussion? Seeing none? All in favor of NDP 9? Opposed? Carried. That brings us to Lib 1. Ms. O'Connell.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So this amendment will be to change E1, and it will read as, set out the number of matters or complaints that were referred to the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency under subsections 31.2, 52.8, and 53.4. And just to quickly speak to this, this was just a request that in the annual report, it would require the chairperson to include a line about how many investigations were referred to in CIRA, and it was indicated in testimony that this is already being done, but it would have the benefit of transparency in terms of requiring it.
Thank you. Any discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. This brings us to G2. Again, Ms. O'Connell.
anyone.
Or anyone, sure. Share the
Okay.
load.
Okay. Look forward to that. Anyone? Again, so this is just replacing under 2F. And if the legislative clerk wants to let me know if that's wrong, but contain data about complaints, including disaggregated, and this is the change, demographic and.
Any discussion on this amendment?
Again, it's just to ensure that it's not just race-based data, but demographic data as well be disaggregated. Should
Fair
be
enough.
pretty clear.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall clause 13, as amended, carry? All in favor? On division? Okay. This brings us to clause 14 and NDP 9.1. Mr. Julian.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je pense que ça va être plus
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this will be easier because we've basically adopted a principle with regard to the agency. Now it's a question of the RCMP and the annual reports of the provinces. This amendment will do the same thing as what we just passed. We're going to include complaints that were disposed of, including those, if any, that were disposed of through the reconciliation process with Indigenous peoples. So the principle behind this amendment is effectively part of this and part of the reconciliation process.
Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So shall clause 14, as amended, carry? On division? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That brings us to clause 15. Shall clause 15 carry? Carried, okay. Brings us to clause 16. Clause 16, we get to NDP 10. Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is another recommendation from Breaking Barriers. It deals with the ongoing issues with the RCMP identified in the Merlo-Davidson lawsuit, also referenced during the mass casualty inquiry, that it was difficult to get important material. If we have a complaint commission that has the ability really to ensure that the appropriate materials are released, what this would do is ensure that a failure to comply for production of this material, these documents, would constitute an offense under subsection 90, bracket 1.
Thank you. Any
and I should just add that the complementary amendment is NDP 58, which we'll probably see many days from now, who knows. But wanted to flag that they are essentially part of a similar approach from recommendations coming from Breaking Barriers.
Great, thank you. Any further? Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much. Though we appreciate the amendment, I think it goes a little bit too far in applying potential criminal penalties against individuals who are not willfully obstructing an investigation. Section 89 of the bill already deals with offenses related to harassment, obstruction, destroying documents, and there's already a provision for that. So, unfortunately, I cannot support it.
Any further, Madame Michaud?
Moi, je me demande.
I wonder if it happens often that an agency or an organization is in a situation where they don't comply with this? And if so, what are the consequences of that? Is it the individuals, the commission itself that did not comply? What happens in those cases? If there is non-compliance, there may be a good reason for it. Perhaps somebody could shed some light on it.
Go ahead.
Well, there are instances where, with regard to the current Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, where the commission doesn't receive information in as timely a fashion as it would like, the information from the RCMP. But I would say in our experience, or in the commission's experience, it is rare for that to be a willful intent to obstruct the process. But as noted, there is a provision already in the bill that an offense already for willful obstruction in the event that that were to occur.
I think Mr. Motz.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. What I'm curious about now is, I was going to ask it the other day, but we were moving along so quickly, I forgot about it. We mentioned a lot about the RCMP. We are now adding the CBSA to the exact same legislation, right? So why are we silent on CBSA bringing this information forward? Like, we mentioned the RCMP only, and the whole purpose of this is to say we're going to now amalgamate the two agencies under one to report back to the Complaints Commission, and yet we don't mention them at any point so far. I'm wondering whether we say the agency, but that isn't, to me, unless in the definitions, we mention agency means CBSA, but I don't think it does. And I'm just curious to know if it's an oversight, whether it's listed somewhere else, and I've missed it. Never mind. Agency means Canada Border Services. Thank you. I missed it.
It's good to have these problems resolved so readily. Is there any further discussion on Mr. Julian's amendment? All in favor of NDP 10? All opposed? Defeated. Shall clause 16 carry? All in favor? Opposed? No? Okay. Carried. Brings us to clause 17. And once again, Mr. Julian, you're up.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate members of the committee in their consideration of this. I'm glad we're getting into this, and I do hope, Mr. Chair, that we'll be able to schedule additional meetings in the next few days so that we can get through this important legislation, and we do have a lot of amendments to consider. In this particular case, NDP 11 would add privileged, in terms of allowing the Commission to have access to privileged information, the ability of NSERA, for example, to investigate is in part because of their ability to access this privileged information. The reality is the PCRC need to have access to that privileged information if they are investigating national security issues. And so the objective of this amendment is to allow for that access to information so that the new PCRC can be on par with NSERA in its abilities to review activities and handle complaints for both the RCMP and CBSA.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not comfortable with this amendment. It's just giving a little bit too much power to the chairperson, whether be able to see some solicitor-client privileged information, but perhaps would any of the witnesses be able to guide us on this? Would this information be required to fulfill some of these investigations?
So the PCRC would be able to have access to privileged information. My understanding of this amendment is that it is a consequential amendment to NDP 16 that would actually provide the PCRC with access to excluded information under 19, which would entail solicitor-client privileged information, but for employees, for instance, solicitor-client information that is shared with the RCMP and CBSA when they have to deal with the commission, or or information that the RCMP and CBSA prepare to have meetings with the commission. So the exclusion is in place to, I think, provide for procedural fairness, among other.
Mr. Motz, go ahead.
I want to continue on that question, and I too have concerns about this term and also the extension of it. We have NSERA for a reason, for exactly this reason, in my understanding, so that the Complaints Commission, does not have to and should not be exposed to national security or not necessarily, cabinet confidences. They can have access to that in the right circumstance, obviously. But some things that are of a nature to compromise national security, I think it's important that that's what NSERA is for. And unless I hear otherwise, I certainly can't support this in this extension of powers to this Complaints Commission.
Was that a question? Don't, that's a statement?
Yeah, I think he answered my question previously.
Okay, fair enough. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We too also have concerns about privacy and the right for, whether it's individuals, RCMP, CBSA, to have solicitor-client privileges. So we think this just goes too far in that. And should there ever be a situation where that information is crucial, there are legal mechanisms to go through, but to, as a almost right, to allow client solicitor privileges to be shared automatically, we think that, or able to access that if requested, we think goes too far, and there are other avenues if there were really a case that required that. So we can't support this change.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor of NDP 11? All opposed? Rejected? Defeated?
Such a harsh term,
I've been listening to the... I've been listening to the speaker. Rejecté. I don't like the thought of you being defeated. It's a spiritual thing, you know? Okay, carrying on. We have NDP 12.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think the other 2 days ago, what you said was it not quite adopted.
Yeah, not passed.
Not passed. Yeah, I prefer that language rather than rejected. It sounds very harsh. NDP 12 would include that medical information, including information from mental health professionals, would be included as information that is accessed. This is something that we heard from Breaking Barriers would be important. Requesting medical information that is only physical does not provide for a full and comprehensive review of an individual's situation. Namely, information from a mental health professional would be included in this, and I believe that there may be a sub-amendment on this.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. We do have a sub-amendment. I have copies in both official languages. But what we would propose, we agree in principle. What we would propose is that, thank you, medical information, strike out namely, and change it to including information from mental health care professionals. And the reason for this is that, again, I think the intention is that it could be included and allowed to be included, but this would not be the only example, but the option is there. So it's just changing the language to make it a little clearer.
Thank you. So the discussion is on the sub-amendment. Madame Michaud?
Je me questionne encore une fois sur la...
I'm just wondering about the pertinence of this. Medical information, that seems quite clear to me. I would just wonder why we say supplementary. I was wondering what the sub-amendment does. It just says including mental health. It seems to me that it was included in the mention of medical information. I don't really see the point in adding useless details. I don't know if it's just me, but for me, it says medical information. In the French version, it says all medical information. But that's my opinion.
Okay, the vote is on the sub-amendment. All in favor of the sub-amendment? Opposed? Carried. Okay, any further discussion on the Mr. Julian's motion as amended? Seeing none, all in favor of Mr. Julian's motion as amended? Opposed?
That's an operative word for him right now, his promotion.
He's getting paid by the motion, that's all. Carried, by the way. As amended. And Mr. Julian gets to go to work once again. NDP 13, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate everyone's patience as we move through these amendments. We've gotten them from all parties, though, so I may be speaking a little more often today, but in coming days that will switch as we move through this bill. And I'm very happy that we are working all together to improve aspects of this bill. There is no doubt that Bill C-20 will be much better coming out of committee than it was going in, and that's really what we are paid to do. I wanted to move NDP 13. This would delete the ability for Commissioner or the President to refuse access to privileged information sought by the Commission under this section. It would basically delete 17.6, which requires the Commissioner or President to indicate why they're not giving it the information. This is something that to make this Complaints Commission have the ability to access that information is fundamentally important. So this would delete 17.6 of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Is there any discussion? Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, just wondering, and maybe it's a question for our witnesses, but would the RCMP and CBSA deputy heads have the opportunity to refuse share privileged information, like with proper justification to protect the integrity of a case or operational information, maybe?
Yes, actually, I understand the intent of the removal of subsection 6 is to prevent the commissioner or the president of CBSA from refusing to provide certain information. But in fact, that provision doesn't allow the commissioner or the president to refuse. It merely says if they do refuse, this is what they need to do in refusing it, and that they need to provide the commission with the reasons why they have determined that the information is not both relevant and necessary, and give an indication of the nature and the date of the information, which would then allow the commission, the PCRC, to determine whether or not the commission actually, in fact, needs the information, and whether to pursue other options, perhaps a judicial review application to the federal court to try to obtain the information.
So there's a mechanism in place already for that?
Yes.
Fine.
Any further discussion? Mr. Shipley?
I won't be able to support this today. It's just deleting the ability of the RCMP and CBSA to refuse to give Commission access to privileged information is not something we want to see in this, so we won't be supporting this today.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of NDP 13? All opposed? Not passed. One more shot. Mr. Julian on NDP 14.
Well, I thank you. I have actually quite a few other shots to come, Mr. Chair. But I'll try to keep them as brief as possible because I know everybody has reviewed the amendments. So I know each member basically has, after the clarifying questions, the ability to then vote on it. So it doesn't require a big lead-in or introduction. NDP 14 is, again, a recommendation from Breaking Barriers to ensure that memorandums of understanding are rendered public. And so what this would do is ensure that there is the transparency that is so important to ensure the success of this new Complaints Commission.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of NDP 14? All opposed? Mr. Julian, I saw your hand up both sides, so I'm assuming you're going to vote for it.
No, I voted. It was sort of a lingering vote.
Okay, fair enough.
I was trying to did a victory lap with my hand.
Because this one passed.
Yes, yeah.
So shall clause 17 as amended carry? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. This brings us to clause 18. And Mr. Julian again, NDP 15, please.
To facilitate the work, given the number of amendments we have, both NDP 15 and NDP 16, I believe, have been voted on already in previous sections of the bill. So I just wanted to ask through you to the clerk whether, in his opinion, we have already discussed those two items, and if that is the case, then I would withdraw both NDP 15 and NDP 16. We certainly have had the discussion around NDP 16. I believe we've had it around NDP 15 as well.
Okay. I'm sorry? I guess that's a question for the officials.
No, it was to the clerk.
So I think the concern is that Mr. Julian mentioned the previous amendment was linked to these. And
We discussed the subject matter. I believe I'm correct in saying that both NDP 15 and NDP 16 should be withdrawn because they were defeated in a previous incarnation in one of the previous clauses.
You're certainly free to withdraw them if you wish.
Yeah, I will do that.
Okay. Okay, so that means that shall clause 18 carry? On division? Which brings us to clause 19. NDP 16 has been withdrawn. Shall clause 19 carry? On division? Okay. So there are no amendments to clauses 20 through 25. We can vote them all in a block if we have unanimous consent to do so. Do we have unanimous consent? Yes. Okay. So shall clauses 20 to 25 carry? On division, okay. That brings us to clause 26. And I recognize G3 now as a government motion, so I would invite someone from the government side to move that.
Thank you, Chair. Under Section B of this, it would read as, use information obtained by the Commission under a review conducted under, strike out section and replace with subsection 28(1) or 2, or Section 29 of any activity that was, is, or may be carried out by the RCMP or agency if, and then in I, the change would be, the information is relevant and necessary to conduct of a review under subsection 28(1) or 2, or Section 29. So the rationale for this change is just simply to allow another specified activity review, the information contained within that, to be part of an investigation that the PCRC would do. It's already included in the legislation that other information can be included in the PCRC review, however, not from provincial, what might be a provincial review. And in some cases where, for example, the RCMP, the jurisdiction does actually fall under our provincial counterparts. So this simply includes that if there were another activity review, that information could be included in the work that the PCRC is doing.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, shall G3 carry? Yeah. All opposed? Okay, carried. Shall clause 26, as amended, carry? On division? Yes? Shall clause 27 carry? On division? Okay. Shall clause 28, sorry, we got clause 28, NDP 17.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually a slightly more complicated clause because I think what we have is a number of amendments that are seeking to make the review of specified activities in Section 28 broader, in keeping with the comments that we've had from organizations such as Amnesty and others who have raised concerns about ensuring that reviews can be initiated by more than the review that is currently in the legislation. So I actually, curiously, will have a question that I'm asking to the witnesses. We have NDP 17 that talks about the request of ministers initiating a review of union representatives as well in NDP 18. And then we have Ms. Michaud's amendment, which talks about non-governmental organizations. I think if the goal that we all share is to have the ability to have these reviews undertaken from a variety of different standpoints. So my question to the witnesses is, in your opinion, does BQ1, talking about non-governmental organizations, would that incorporate NDP 18 union representatives, or do you believe that the language needs to be specific for all three of the amendments? And if that is the case, then, Mr. Chair, how do we incorporate all three elements to ensure that transparency and the ability to request those reviews?
I should have mentioned that if, as written, if NDP 17 passes, NDP 18 and Block 1 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. And if NDP 17 does not pass, NDP 18 can be moved, but then it would be a line conflict with Block 1. So are you proposing to amalgamate these three in some manner?
Well, first, I'd like to hear back whether, from our witnesses, whether their understanding is non-governmental organizations would include unions or or not. I believe it's not the case, but wanted to double check.
We think it could. There could be other wording that might better serve both interests. The intent in 28 is not to restrict who may ask the minister or the chairperson of the commission for a specified activity review. It's not intended to narrow that or to specify who may or may not or may be excluded from asking for a review, recommending, or suggesting a review. The intent of 28 is to provide a means for the minister who would otherwise not have the authority to direct or make a request to the commission to undertake something where he believes it is in the public interest, that he, for reasons of his own accountability, can answer to this place that he has brought a matter to the attention of the commission. The commission draws very broadly on all sorts of sources, both within and outside government, in formulating its plan for what may benefit from a specified activity review. So, as drafted, 28 does not restrict any organization whatsoever from engaging either with the minister at the political level or directly with the commission about where it believes a specified activity review would be warranted. My colleagues from the commission may have more detail.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, our existing legislation, we get requests somewhat regularly from non-governmental organizations asking for a systemic review.
Thank you for that. That is very helpful, but it still means that ultimately at this point, the minister or the commission would make the decision. And I think what we're searching for, what we're looking for in these amendments is to provide an ability for lack of a better word, a trigger to ensure that those specified, that review could take place. So I know Madame Michaud wants to speak. I guess I bookmarked the problem with you, Mr. Chair. Whether or not that's something that, like Ms. O'Connell, in a very inspired way, parked a clause. Whether we would want to park this clause and come back to it when we work offline. That's something that I'm certainly open to, if other members of the committee are in agreement.
Madame Michaud, allez-y.
Well, what I gather from NDP 17, 18, and BQ1 is to allow other organizations to also ask for a review of specific activities. But if I follow you correctly, they can also do so, except that it's not specified in the Act. So that was a request from the groups to do so. I was wondering if there was a way to do so, to include the groups that Mr. Julian referred to, as well as the non-government organizations that BQ1 refers to. If we added that, would we achieve the same thing? They can already do it, but now it would be included in the Act, specified in the Act. Yes, that's basically it. Answered the witness. All right, so if we take out NDP 17 and 18, and we take a BQ1 and we replace non-governmental organizations by third parties, then we achieve the same thing. Well, yes, I think it's the same for everybody. But go ahead, Mr. Coops.
Bond? Yeah.
Pardon, je pensais que peut-être d'autres.
Sorry, I thought maybe we could use some other wording that says nothing in the legislation excludes other parties to request a review, or something like that, possibly. Instead of specifying who can.
I don't think I actually heard you move 17 yet, so it's still in flux, whatever's going on here.
Mais parce que je pense qu'il faut être.
Because I think we have to be flexible on this if we want to get through this. To talk about third parties. In my view, that does not necessarily include the fact that a union rep or a House of Commons committee or a Senate committee couldn't invoke this. Basically, the decision-making power is concentrated at the ministerial level or with the Commission. So if we want to broaden that, well, that is why we propose these amendments. It seems to me that the best thing to do for now would perhaps be to have some separate discussions on this. Maybe we could just set aside Clause 28 to consider this matter. I don't want to take too much time today, but perhaps we could come to a mutual agreement much more quickly.
To park Clause 28 for the moment. Do we have agreement to do that? I am seeing consensus. So we will therefore park 28. And that takes us to Clause 29. Shall Clause 29 carry? On division? Shall Clause 30 carry? On division? Brings us to Clause 31 and NDP 20. Mr. Julian, please.
As I mentioned earlier, the issue of national security as a committee we've already dealt with, and I respect that most members of the committee did not agree with that approach, so I'll withdraw NDP 20.
NDP 20 is withdrawn. So shall Clause 31 carry? On division? Shall Clause 32 carry? On division? Brings us to Clause 33. Madame Michaud, Block 3. Excuse me. If Block 3 is adopted, NDP 21 and PV 1 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Okay, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Alors, c'est un amendement.
This is an amendment that would allow third parties, such as nonprofit organizations, to file a complaint. Right now, with the legislation, it has to be a legal representative or someone authorized by the complainant with a signature who can file the complaint. And so this would open up some possibilities. It was a request by a number of witnesses. Specifically, the Société Québécoise des Avocats en droit d'immigration, who deal with this type of situation quite often. This amendment is one of many other types of clauses that you see in the bill. So that's why I raised it.
Sorry, Ms. Shipley, then Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. We will not be able to support this today. It seems unnecessary and may just lead to an enormous number of requests and bog down this whole process. So we won't be supporting this.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. We can support this in principle, but we would like to make a sub-amendment. I do have copies, but I don't think it will be needed. It's quite simple. Instead of non-governmental organization in both Section 1 and 2, we would change that to third party. And the rationale is that at the end of the day as well, that the commission would still have the ability to determine, but hearing these concerns or these complaints or allegations coming forward that from other parties is fine to be considered, and it sounds like it does already happen. We just don't want it to limit it to non-governmental organizations, and we just think third parties is cleaner to keep that ability open.
Thank you. The discussion is on the amendment, sub-amendment of Ms. O'Connell. Mr. Motts?
Can the officials explain or confirm that you already deal with complaints from third parties, do you not?
Yeah, we do accept third-party complaints with the authorization of the individual who's involved. So if we don't take a third-party complaint, if someone watches YouTube and sees RCMP enforcement and files a complaint and there's no connection there, they've just watched it on YouTube, we will not take that complaint because it's third-party.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yes, but if an individual wants to make a complaint on behalf of someone else and has their authorization to make that complaint on their behalf, we accept third-party complaints.
So, hold on, let me read this here.
And that would include a non-governmental organization could file a complaint on behalf of an individual.
Right.
On this sub-amendment? Yes, yep, absolutely. Did you want to distribute that?
Just some clarity on this then. In this amendment, if this goes through, would the NGO need the third party to be involved in that and have their written authority to do that? Oh, we're still on your, pardon me.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be both, it'd be one or the other.
The authority of the complaint.
Yeah. Sorry, what I'm just trying to get clarification on is if there is a complaint by the third party, do they need the person that it was affected upon to have their approval to go forward with that? Or can just any third party be making the complaint?
The bill as written doesn't require consent, but there is discretion for the PCRC to refuse to deal with the complaint if the individual making the complaint, the third party, is not sufficiently connected to the incident or doesn't have the approval of the individual or, for example, is not the parent or guardian or that sort of thing.
So with that explanation, would we not be setting ourselves up for the potential of some frivolous and vexatious type complaints when all we'd have to do is clear up the language here that says with authorization a third party can? Like, I know it's your practice, that's what you expect, but if the act doesn't say it, and because people are always going to go back, if they'll appeal your decision if you decide not to take their complaint because the act says you can. It doesn't say anywhere in the act that you have to have authorization. So if you have if you require the aggrieved individual to authorize it, then it would make sense that we would put something like that in the act, because otherwise you're opening yourself up to a world of hurt and tying up your processes by people who just want to tie up your processes without any skin in the game. They just want to tie up the process and cause aggravation. And I would hope that there'd be some understanding of that, if we're trying to We're trying to make it easy for the public who have a complaint to be dealt with. But we all know in our society there are those who are litigious and who are frivolous and vexatious in their complaints and have zero impact on the people who may be aggrieved. So I would think it would behoove us to ensure that if we're going to change any language, we add language that includes, it clarifies the fact that with authorization from the aggrieved individual, or however, whatever wording you want to put in there. Otherwise, I think by expanding this to include CBSA and RCMP, I would defer to some of my former law enforcement colleagues to talk about, and even from CBSA colleagues to say, will that leaving out that clarity cause the potential for workload, and we're not actually improving what we intend to improve with this legislation, and that is to make sure that those who have been aggrieved are heard, their investigation is dealt with appropriately in a timely fashion, and they get a response back from the investigating body with the RCMP or CBSA and or the commission, but with the understanding that we're actually, if I'm a third party and I want to make a complaint, I have that complainant's, that aggrieved individual's permission to do so. I'd be more than happy to hear from officials on their take on that.
Well, yes, certainly. If we're expanding the pool of people that can make complaints beyond those that are affected or impacted, then it will cause further resources to be drawn to investigate those complaints and deal with those complaints, both at the RCMP and the PCRC.
And in some cases, frivolously.
In some cases, yes. If they're not, like as was mentioned, a YouTube video and a complaint of actions, on YouTube, where they're not directly involved or implicated or have no connection to that incident, potentially could create an increase in complaints that where the individuals themselves that are impacted aren't complaining, but other people are. It could lead to a rise in overall complaints and resources to be drawn to those to investigate those and deal with those.
CBSA?
If I can say today in our process, so we do require the signature because if you watch the reruns of Border Security on TV, so whenever there are reruns in the season, we get an increase in complaints of people that are just watching the show and complaining about whatever they're seeing on TV when it has no impact to them. So if that were, yes, it would increase volumes of people that are not actually affected.
But it's true, though. It is.
Okay, thank you. We go next to Ms. O'Connell, and I point out that there is, and then Madame Michaud, there is, this amendment requires a grammatical correction to the French. Requires tout particulier ou toute tierce partie in both sections. Is that your point?
No, my point was, thanks, Mr. Chair. I think the intention of this was to ensure that a complaint couldn't be rejected simply because it was in the original version an NGO, but our proposal just a third party. But ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, but even the example just provided in regards to CBSA and the increase in complaints is that ultimately the PCRC would still have the discretion to decide whether to move forward or not, and that this is simply an amendment to ensure that it doesn't get automatically excluded simply because it's a third party making that complaint. So if there are processes in place, such as there needs to be a connection, or I think we've heard testimony, or we've heard before too, that if it were a public interest situation that is garnering attention, that ultimately the decision-making authority of whether or not to move forward with an investigation that authority still exists, but that it wouldn't be automatically excluded simply because it was a third party making the initial complaint. Is that a fair assessment of what this amendment would potentially do?
Yes, in Bill C-20, there's already the discretion for the PCRC to refuse to deal with complaints if the individual making the complaint, as I indicated, doesn't have a sufficient connection to the incident. As well, there's also a provision for the Commission to refuse to deal if the complaint is considered frivolous, trivial, vexatious, or made in bad faith.
So the example of watching reruns and complaints go up, there's still no obligation to automatically investigate those complaints then, because it's already protected for in terms of, excuse me, the discretion.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that the intention behind this amendment is, and I want to draw my colleagues' attention to this, right now it has to be a legal representative or someone authorized by the plaintiff with a signature. If they're associations like the Lawyers Associations, and what they told us here, they said sometimes there is an immigration process that is ongoing, whereby somebody might be sent outside of the country, and then it becomes complicated for that person to lodge a complaint against the Canadian Border Services Agency. Maybe something is being suspended because the complaint was filed and the person is abroad, and it's very difficult to get a signature or the consent. So the intention behind this wasn't to give every third party the right to lodge a complaint if they see something on television, for example. We understand that the Commission would have the right of refusal, but it's more a question of a situation like the Refugee Lawyers Association could be able to lodge a complaint on behalf of the complainant. And sometimes it is very difficult to get the signature. So that was the intention behind that amendment. Maybe that will help some of the members make the right decision.
Lynn.
Moi, je trouve c'est extrêmement important.
I find it extremely important to have the possibility to deal with the questions that are broader. As Ms. Michaud just said, the Canadian Refugees Lawyers Association their position was very clear with regard to systemic procedures. We don't have any way to deal with some of these situations. It's not clear in the bill either as it currently stands. So the fact that the Commission will have the power to set aside complaints that are unfounded, in my view, I'm already reassured about that. I don't find it to be a problem. Right now, the process is such that it can't be open for people who have problems or systemic problems. We couldn't deal with those problems through the current legislation. So I think it's worth passing the sub-amendment and the amendment. But the only caution I would give is that it doesn't seem that there is a possibility to attack the policies or services provided. It seems to me that that's an important, essential element. I wanted to ask the clerk the question, through you, Mr. Chair, to be sure about this. You said at the outset that if BQ3 and then NDP 21 could not be passed?
BQ3 is adopted, NDP 21 and PV1 cannot be moved due to a line conflict.
Parce que qu'est-ce qui manque là-dessus?
Because what is missing is the NDP 21 is there's an element missing. It's something that we heard a lot from our witnesses. I think this is an important aspect. 4 complaints. We can't have 2 sub-amendments at the same time. But if we adopt the first sub-amendment, I will try to offer the second sub-amendment to include the policies or procedures of the agency or the services it provides. I'm not concerned that this would open the door too wide. I am concerned that there aren't enough services, or resources rather. That is the information we got from the witnesses and the former minister. I think the principle behind this commission is to provide access to deal with individual complaints or complaints from people who have left Canada and can't be there in person, or more systemic problems that could exist.
I'm going to stick my neck out here a little bit. My advice is NDP 21 will not be admissible. I can't make that ruling until it's moved, but if it were moved, I would have to rule it inadmissible, that and PV1 as well. So I'm thinking that if you happen to decide against Block 3 because of C21 or NDP 21, you might want to factor that into your consideration. Madame Michaud.
Ben, je sais pas si
Well, if I think I understood what Mr. Julian said, but we can certainly vote on the amendments that the Liberals have proposed. And we might be able to propose a sub-amendment to include the purpose of NDP 21 in NDP 23.
Discussion on the amendment is winding down, or the sub-amendment. Is there any further discussion on Madame O'Connell's sub-amendment? Seeing none. All in favor of the sub-amendment?
Oh, Miss May. Miss May.
I'm sorry, Ms. May? I'm sorry, Ms. May, before you speak, we're going to have to get the clerk to test your audio.
So, Madam May, please say 1 or 2 sentences, please. You're on mute right now.
Yes, sorry, I was not wanting hearing background noise. Yes, if you can hear me all right.
Unfortunately,
I didn't pick my interpretation.
Could you please turn off your video feed so maybe your sound will be better?
Is the sound better now?
Please talk a little bit more.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been enjoying hearing you all, working so collaboratively. It's been delightful.
Yes,
I hope
it
you're all
works
well.
now. It works now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. May, go ahead with your comments.
Thank you. I thought as long as, and I didn't mean to interrupt the vote on this amendment to BQ, to Bloc Québécois, mais aussi come to.
From the Bloc Québécois and the Liberals, it's already been mentioned in
this channel. I just wanted to make a brief comment to speed your work along, as I think you may remember because of the strange motion that each committee passes that requires that I show up at committee if I want to present amendments. I don't move my amendments. They are deemed moved. In every case, as far as I can see, the amendments that are Green Party amendments that are coming up are drawn from the testimony and evidence of a group I used to belong to, the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers. I wanted to put forward as just a helpful suggestion that I'd be prepared, since I think my amendments in every case are, I identical or so similar to NDP amendments that to add additional comments will just slow you down. But I can't withdraw my amendments. I don't have that power. They are deemed moved as you come to them. I just wanted to offer, and perhaps Peter Julian can take it forward. I will stay silent on all my amendments. Know that I care about them a lot. I hope you pass them. But since they're identical to NDP amendments, I will save you time now by flagging that I don't want to be in the way. As you can tell, I may be on a less of a secure connection than if I were stationary in my own office. I just want to please pass them, but I'm not going to speak to them. And with that, I will go back on mute. Thank you.
I'm kind of unsure how to go here. If you don't want them to be automatically moved, we can, as a committee, agree to act in this way. Mr. Julian looks puzzled. Go ahead, please.
I'm puzzled, Mr. Chair, because what I thought she was saying was they would be moved in the case where there's no corresponding amendment from another party. I didn't believe she was withdrawing all of her amendments.
I just want to clarify. So what I'm suggesting is that as a committee, we will give due deference to Madame May's request. And if there is no, we will move them or not according to whether we think it's appropriate to do so. Madame May, is that acceptable to you?
No, I'm just trying to help your work. I care about these amendments, but I don't need to speak to each one of them. It seems to me there are very similar amendments in the same motions each time, and I don't have the power to withdraw my amendments from consideration. I think they're good amendments. I like them a lot. I would love it if they were carried, but I'm in your hands on that. If you want to just move ahead each time, that I think the automatic impact of the motion you passed is that all of my amendments will be, as you go along, deemed to have been moved. But it's up to you if at this point how you want to handle it. I don't withdraw them. I think they're great. I just won't be speaking to them.
We'll muddle forward and do our best to try and sort this out as we go forward. Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Just quickly, too, looking through our charts, every one I see of those amendments are the same as an NDP amendment. So you're saying muddle through it. We're pretty straightforward. They're already in there, someone else's, and Mr. Julian's here. Is that what we're saying? Maybe we can just, we can't even do a UC? There's no way as...
Well, I think as a committee we could decide, because I think Ms. May is speaking of routine motions that we passed at the outset, and we passed them, we can I think, set them aside. But I think we're getting a little far afield at the moment. Let us carry on with the business at hand, which is Block 3 and Ms. O'Connell's amendment, or sub-amendment. Can we do that? Okay, so all in favor of Ms. O'Connell's sub-amendment? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Now, Mr. Julian.
So I'm going to go out on the high wire here with the indulgence of the committee and offer another sub-amendment that is taken from NDP 21 that would add a B. So we've got Section 33(1), Section 33 bracket 2, and that would simply add A after 2 and then add the B that is from NDP 21, the policies or procedures of the agency or the service it provides. So it would just extract that reference in the CBSA investigation, review, and hearing of complaints to expand that to include the policies and procedures of the agency or the services it provides. This was the recommendation, as Madame Michaud said, and I've said as well, the Canadian Association for Refugee Lawyers. to expand the ability of complaints coming as well from third parties that would allow policies or procedures of the agency to be the subject of complaint.
So paragraph B from 21 would not be able to be added because it will be inadmissible. It changes the spirit and scope of the bill. This is one of the reasons why, if you were to move 21, if we got to that point, I'd have to move it, rule it inadmissible. Other than that, I'm not quite clear what you're suggesting besides that.
Well, the way you were obviously very clear what I was suggesting, Mr. Chair. I hadn't realized that you were prepared to rule on it being out of scope. That surprises me because this is certainly something that we heard from the Canadian Association for Refugee Lawyers and others very clearly. But your ruling is that it is out of scope for the bill.
I haven't actually made the ruling. I can't do that until it's moved.
Well, I'm moving it as a sub-amendment, so...
But if, okay, so that sub-amendment would have to be ruled out of scope. And there's a language about this. It's about the amendment seeks to introduce process regarding complaints about the policies and procedures of the agency, which is a new concept that goes beyond the scope of the bill as adopted by the House at second reading. An amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. So that's my information about 21, which I'm now applying to section B of if you're trying to add to.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, I like and respect you very much, but I would not be doing justice to what we heard from witnesses that very clearly talked about this. And I would suggest that if that was out of scope, then the idea of having third parties could potentially be ruled out of scope. So I will, in the nicest way possible, having great respect for your abilities, Mr. Biddle knows where I'm going on this, I will challenge that ruling and allow the committee to make that decision as to whether or not to perceive it as in scope.
Fair enough. The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So voting yes means that you're supporting the decision of the chair that this particular sub-amendment would be out of scope. And if you vote no, you're saying that it should remain in scope. So shall we, all in favor, all voting to sustain the chair?
It pains me, but...
Okay. And opposed? So that the decision of the chair is sustained.
Yes.
Congratulate you, Mr. Chair, in that victory. So you have been sustained. So I cannot offer the sub-amendment. That's the committee's decision, which then should mean that we vote on BQ3, which I will be supporting.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this most interesting amendment? Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Not really, more just a quick point of order. We just are curious, we're making good time here today, Chair, and I know some members of our side do have some other commitments later. We just wanted to know for sure what time we're going to be going to today.
7, which is 2 hours.
So we did suspend briefly, and so we're expectedly extend that amount of time. So we're at 3.
So we can go until 7.
We can go home at 7.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Connell, on point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As much as it pains me to suggest this, but I would request that you and the clerk look into additional meeting time, given the amount of time we're going to need on this bill, and if we have other studies that the committee has already agreed to, that in order to finish this, we're going to need additional committee time, and I would suggest that you at least come forward with some options that then everyone could look at. But I'm fine with leaving tonight at 7, but we really do need some options for additional committee time to get through this study.
Fair enough. Mr. Motz, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think we can actually get through it. I agree to 7 o'clock tonight, and while I'm sure I'll be outvoted, but I don't necessarily think we need extra meetings. However, if you decide to have them, I would ask that the subcommittee meet to determine those as opposed to you arbitrarily select them. So I think that would avoid a whole lot of hassles, and that's what I would recommend. So if we vote to agree to have you extend the extra meeting times, and I'm opposed to that. But if you do, and that's the vote, then I would just ask that whatever dates you and the clerk come up with are run past our subcommittee to ensure that they fit with the schedules of our people so that we can get proper people here.
So we can't actually vote on this right now because we have a motion on the floor.
It was just
But I
on the
will
point of
certainly
order
say it
in
was
terms
just
of
a point order.
timing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm not asking for a vote in fairness. I would like some options and how we figure that out. I'm fine.
I will talk to the clerk and he'll see what's available and we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Or to the committee. I don't want to do a subcommittee meeting because that takes up a meeting slot. So maybe we'll do it more informally. Mr. Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I completely agree with Ms. O'Connell on this. Having extra meetings makes a lot of sense. I think that's something you can do in consultation with the four parties, but you do have the ability to call those meetings with the proper notice, and that will allow us to move through. The NDP has a lot of amendments, but when we have debated and discussed and made a decision, the subsequent amendments that are on the same issue, I will be withdrawing. So for those who are daunted by the number of NDP amendments, that number will be much smaller ultimately, because as we go through each of these issues, I withdraw further amendments that are on the same topic. And if the other parties agree to do the same thing as well, hopefully, with a few extra meetings next week, we should get this bill improved and back into the House.
Very well. I'll let you advise us as we go forward which amendments, when we get there, you want to withdraw. So for the moment, let us carry on with this amendment. So I think we've ended discussion on Ms. Michaud's motion, Block 3, as amended by Ms. O'Connell. So all in favor of Block 3 as amended? All opposed? Carried. Okay. Okay. So that renders NDP 21 and PV1 moot in any case. That brings us to Block 3.1. Madame Michaud, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It relates to what we've just voted on. It just goes a little further, and it allows the members of the public to file a complaint. I don't think it needs any more explanation than that.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Mr. Shipley?
Yeah, we feel that's redundant, not necessary. They can already do that. Is that not to the witnesses? Do we not have that process already?
We would agree it appears to be redundant since the bill already provides for that.
Madame Michaud?
I can simply withdraw the amendment, if you like, with the agreement of the NDP.
Yes? Withdrawn. We get to NDP 22. Were you withdrawing this amendment?
No, I'm not, Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay.
Are you really out of order?
I'm just so excited that you're going to move another amendment.
Well, this is actually a new subject, but an important one in terms of the complaint timelines. Currently in the bill, it proposes that a complaint must be made within 1 year after the day on which the conduct is alleged to have occurred. What we received in terms of witnesses, both from the Canadian Council for Refugees and Breaking Barriers, they wanted to make that time period, that time limit, similar to what happens with civil litigation laws in Canada. And given that some of these complaints are dealing with severe trauma from misconduct, it may take time for complainants to come forward. And that's certainly why a 2-year timeline is what exists in civil litigation. So the NDP 22 would essentially replace the 1-year time limit and make it a 2-year time limit in keeping with civil litigation laws.
Thank you. I should point out that if NDP 22 is adopted, BQ4, BQ 4.1, and BQ 4.2 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Mr. Motts, go ahead.
Well, having said that, I mean, it almost is worthwhile to accept it, then we can get rid of 3 more. But anyway, just saying. I would like to ask the officials. What's that? I'd like to ask the officials, we're talking about a time limit extension doubling. And so from the time a complaint can be laid after the alleged offense has occurred or a grievance. Do you have a practice now, either agency or the commission, that allows for a complainant to make a complaint after the 1 year in special circumstances? I'd like each of you to respond to that.
So currently, we generally say 1 year, but we will accept on a case-by-case over the 1 year limit. There has to be enough information for us to still be able to investigate. There has to be a reasoning of why it wasn't done. So, for example, if somebody was in detention for a year and a half, was not able to make the complaint, then yes, we would accept that. Somebody who just watched the TV show and decided that 4 years ago they weren't satisfied and then they complained, they don't have the name of the officer, they don't have the location, then no, we would not accept that because we're not able to investigate it.
RCMP?
We don't have a lot of these types of complaints, but we have a similar process. We assess the information on a case-by-case basis and make a determination whether we should investigate.
Thank you. Commission?
Yes, the commission has the discretion to extend the time limit, and we have a policy on our website under the circumstances of which will do that.
Right, okay, so it already exists, and as such, I really don't see the need to have the time limit extended like this from 2 years, because it's just another arbitrary date that you could be extending again, and I personally don't see any reason to accept this, given what our agencies, or what the Commission and the CBSA and the RCMP have informed us.
Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious if through the passing of BQ3, if there are then line conflicts with NDP 22. I know what would happen if this is passed, but our notes say there would be a line conflict since we did pass BQ3, but I stand to be corrected. That's my understanding.
I'm sorry, you speaking of a line conflict with which?
Because we passed Block 3, that NDP 22 has a line conflict. No? Okay,
We passed Block 3. I don't have an indication of a line.
Fair enough. We're just double checking, but we don't have an issue with this.
Okay. Mr. Julian.
I'm going to push back a little bit on my friend Mr. Motts, because the reality is there is a difference between having the ability of somebody to make a complaint up to a 2-year period, particularly in the event of trauma, and somebody applying for an extension that may or may not be accepted after the 1 year has expired. And though he is right to point out that there are provisions that may allow that individual to still file the complaint, the reality is that power is taken away from the individual. So if we don't accept this amendment, we are not empowering people who for a variety of reasons, may have difficulty stepping forward to make the complaint in the first place. And that's why I'm proposing the 2-year timeline, which, as I mentioned before, was recommended by Breaking Barriers and the Canadian Council for Refugees.
Any further discussion? So all in favor of NDP 22? Opposed? Not seeing none? Passed. So this renders BQ4 moot, and as well as BQ 4.1 and 4.2. And that brings us to BQ5. So we have 8 minutes left. I'm wondering if we want to pause here or whether we want to try and tackle BQ5. Go for it. Let's do it. Okay. Madame Michaud, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With this new amendment, well, usually we get a copy of all of the information pertaining to a complaint, but there's also a lot of information that should be sent to the legal representative of the plaintiff. The reason we want that is something I referred to earlier. In some cases, the complainant is outside of the country and we don't have the plaintiff's address. Can the legal representative have access to the information? This would be good for the plaintiff. So that was the explanation I wanted to give to explain this amendment.
Any further discussion? All in favor of Block 5? Opposed? None. Okay. Carried. This brings us to CPC 7. Look at this. 6 minutes to go. Can we do this in 6 minutes? Okay. Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
I would like to move CPC 7. It's fairly straightforward. We just want to delete lines 3 to 5 on page 23 and deleting lines 20 to 23 on page 23. We just don't think the ability to complain directly to an RCMP detachment. We want to make the complaints to the commission. Some of these, we believe, detachments in border patrol areas have 1 to 2 officers, and it would just tie them up too much. So we just figure this is a good amendment and a good way of alleviating that issue.
Very well. Any discussion? Mr. Julian.
So I just have a note that I wanted to follow up with in asking our witnesses whether the adoption of this would have consequences around the discussion that we're still having around Clause 8 and NDP 6. It appears that there is a bit of a conflict between what is proposed here and what we have yet to fully adopt in Clause 8. And so maybe through you to the clerk or to our witnesses.
Someone wish to answer? Go ahead. Mr. Julian, maybe you need to be more specific about who to answer that question.
I believe that NDP 6, as we are working through it, does have an impact on this provision. That being said, I think I intend to vote against it for that reason, but also I don't agree with the principle that's contained within it.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We also don't support this change. This would essentially get rid of the complaint process, the existing complaint process where the RCMP might handle the complaint initially. And we think that this wouldn't work, that the idea is that the initial complaint should be investigated as is, and that, if resolution can be done there, that's great. If not, then the PCRC then can take on that additional role if needed, but this would essentially make the PCRC solely responsible to handle RCMP-related complaints at the first instance, and we think this would be overly burdensome, so we don't support this.
Mr. Shipley.
Chair, I committed to you we could finish this one by 7, and hearing some discussions going around, we'd like to ask for UC to withdraw that amendment.
Do you have unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment? Very well, it's withdrawn.
We have UC to cancel the meeting.
So G4, does this mean if we pass this? Amendment in this clause is G4. Does someone?
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to propose this amendment is deeming under Section 8.1 for the purposes of subsection 7 and 8, a complaint that is referred to the Commission under regulations made under subparagraph 87.012 is deemed to be a complaint made to the Commission. And just very quickly, if I can explain, but hopefully it's self-sufficient, but essentially that the process that if, for example, if a joint proceedings or a complaint, or sorry, proceedings occurred and a referral of complaints were conducted between the PCRC and NCIRA, that would be deemed as receiving this complaint. So, for example, if NCIRA had done some work and then referred the matter to PCRC, that would be deemed a complaint made. So it's a little bit technical, but just to accept that process can happen.
Chair, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with that. Now, what about timelines following that, Ms. O'Connell? Is there any condition? So is it when NCIRA or some other agency got that complaint, or is it when the Commission actually received it? When do those start? Like, what will be reasonable so that we can maybe consider that? I don't.
Well, my understanding of this would not change anything else in the Act in terms of all of those other timing conditions would still apply. Okay. This was just to make it that a complaint from or a referral from NCIRA is deemed a complaint made. But everything else in the Act in terms of timing and process would remain the same. I see shaking heads, so I haven't totally messed that one up. But that was my understanding. Nodding heads. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Mr. Julian, go ahead.
I wanted to ask our witnesses about their interpretation of this clause, but understand that it's now 7 o'clock. Maybe that's where we should leave off for tonight. I would be voting against it. But I would like to ensure that the witnesses can answer on that before I do.
I think we could take a couple minutes and hear an answer to this
question. So I'm interested in what you believe the impacts of this amendment are, and to what extent that shifts the power relationship between PCRC and NCIRA, if any.
In case my nodding didn't make it onto the record, it does not change the timing or the deadlines, as the Parliamentary Secretary pointed out. It may be helpful to look at Amendment G4 in the context of Government Amendment later to come, which is G8, related to the authority to make regulations, and this is actually consequential to that. So this is about the Governor and Council having the authority to delineate where and how complaints are dealt with between the two bodies. And so it's necessary to make some other consequential amendments earlier in the statute before we get to the provisions coming later in relation to regulations, and this is one of those. And as the Parliamentary Secretary pointed out, it simply ensures that there is coherence between the handling of complaints under the two.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of G4? All opposed? None? Oh, one, okay. Carried. So that leaves, shall clause 33 as amended carry? On division? Can I push this to one more? Shall clause 34 carry? On division. So when we resume, we will resume at clause 35. We have two clauses that have been parked and hopefully we can work behind the scenes to get those resolved. Thank you to the officials once again. Your help is most appreciated. Thank you to our clerks and analysts, and thank you all. And we are now adjourned.